No, I'm ready.
You're right. You're pumped up
Recording.
again.
No.
Right
done
now.
that.
Yes, I know. Sorry. So sorry for that, Tom. Hey, if you're listening in, I'm here with magnificent Thom Jones, and we're here talking about teachers, technology, and particularly what's happening with online language teaching. That's what we're here to talk about. So, Tom, tell us a little bit about your thoughts on, what history lessons could we learn from to get us through this time? Like, what kind of strikes you as some good parallels, and how can we feel more optimistic about the time we're in?
It's interesting because I think one of the things that really came to mind when, we had lots of teachers sort of on the Friday told they were teaching online on the Monday, which led to kind of outcry and lots of discussions on forums and amongst all of us, friends, colleagues. And it really brought to mind the first telephone call where Alexander Graham Bell rings through to his other fellow. Or was it Edison? Anyway, whatever. That fella rings through to the other, his other colleague in the other room. And the first telephone call, the guy goes, "Hello," and he says, "Okay, come back into the room." Right. So he immediately negates the invention by saying, "Well, it works, so yes, you can come back in now." And I think there's a lot of that in terms of our responses to technology as a species, where we often resist technology and we often resist the things that it brings in and it brings up in us. So, and I'm sure we all remember that when they introduced the idea of, I remember, and old, but I remember teaching initially with chalk and on a blackboard in various countries around the world, and then getting whiteboards and getting ink and being able to remember, and people going, "Well, yeah, but it's not very good." And I was like, and then
when was that? Sorry, Tom. When was the whiteboard?
About 1932.
I was like, surely that's been around a little while, but I'm like, how old is Tom? Jeez.
I mean, I am Highlander. I walk the earth, ever looking for classes to teach in, and I have done since the dawn of time.
Well, history lessons indeed. So, Tom, this is not the first time there's been an technological innovation. What can we learn from what's happened in the past? And are there any kind of reasons to be cheerful in a way about, and why we should feel optimistic that actually this change, this technology, which isn't new, but is new to a lot of people, is actually could be a really good thing?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's exactly the same as it always has been, in that communication evolves, technology evolves, and the way we communicate changes accordingly. And I always think back to is it Alexander Graham Bell or Edison?
We'll Google that one.
Who invented the telephone, right? And the first recorded telephone conversation ever, right, of human to human, is his assistant going into another room and ringing through and saying hello, and him saying, "Right, come back in the room now." And you're like, well, surely, check it.
That's perfect though, because it actually is, I think, the same emotion that a lot of people feel online. It's sort of like, I've gone into I've said, "Oh, hi, can you see me or can you hear me?" And then immediately I want to revert back to, "Can I get into a classroom as soon as possible, please?" But actually, if you take that as example, everyone's on the phone now, but I think the unfortunate thing for teachers potentially is the pace of change has increased and the requirements change is much faster. So unfortunately, we don't have 30 years for people to feel comfortable with, just as they did with the telephone. They're having to, within months, feel really comfortable with the telephone, or at least find ways to feel comfortable with it. So I think that's a really good analogy though, Tom. I'm thinking also, you were kind of mentioning in a previous conversation about the whiteboard and how even going from blackboard to whiteboard was this big thing. I mean, it seems like it doesn't seem like it would be that different. One's chalk and one's a whiteboard. Yet actually everyone's got a whiteboard, or would prefer a whiteboard over a blackboard. Let's just use that as an example and then even see how interactive whiteboards changed.
Sure. I for me, when I first started teaching a millennia ago, but I remember going to some quite distant countries because I started teaching because I wanted to travel, and so some of those countries, I was in little rural areas up mountains, and it was all, blackboards and all this stuff. I'm allergic to chalk. Interesting discovery. But also,
actually,
Yeah, actually, I think.
So if I send you like a envelope of chalk, you're gonna like properly be like, Highlander, he's out to get me.
Again. No, it's weird. My fingers go all sort of dry. It's really unpleasant.
Oh,
And but what was interesting for me at the time was when we then in that school started to get whiteboards.
yeah,
You know, all lovely ink and pen and very easy, and the amount of people who complained. You know, my colleagues who were like, "Well, this is flash in the pan. It'll never catch on. It's ridiculous." And you're thinking, "This is obviously better. Like, this is obviously gonna. What are you doing?" And it's not the same online offline in the term, in terms of like, we're not saying one is better than the other, but we are saying, listen, look, both of these things are there. Why would we not risk to use both of these things? Why would we restrict ourselves? And just as now, some of your friends, some of your colleagues, I do business training. I'll often get people saying, "Oh, I don't like using the phone." And the way that we, my generation, for example, will talk about, well, I've read the book, I didn't see the movie. And then, my children's generation will be like, I've watched a 2-minute video on YouTube. Why would I need to read a book or watch a movie? And you think,
really, this is so bang on though. I mean, the more you're talking on this, it really does feel, again, that difference between the tool and the knowledge. Thought, I mean, I'm not an educator by profession, and I've sort of had to build my own kind of knowledge through learning from people like yourself. But I mean, I've definitely learned that we've moved on from the expert in the room idea. That is, if it's not dead, it should be dead, because I can get that, as you say, I can get that from a video. I could get that from a million different ways that are much cheaper and better and easier for me to digest than having somebody spout out information at me. So the tool, though, is the different part there. So even though it's how do we get that knowledge from one human being to another? There's lots of tools to do that, but people will expect you to use the tools professionally and to use them well. I mean, just because somebody would prefer to teach me in a letter, that doesn't mean that I, as a student, want to be taught in letter format.
But it's the same with language, isn't it? That we always kind of will resist a language form that we don't like. Yeah. So in British culture, we'll often say, "Well, that's an American spelling," or that or that's and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter anymore. And also, languages change, which is why we're having this conversation in English and not in Latin or in Greek. We could obviously do those things because we're both massively clever,
but of course,
but there's a kind of a love for the static, isn't there? Because once we understand something and know something, we feel familiar and feel comfortable.
I think so.
And that's normal, isn't it? That's human nature, and we're all a bit that way. I still really like tea. I'm not going to change my opinion on tea. No, to things that are not tea, because I like it and I'm comfortable with it. I know what I'm getting.
I think that rounds it out. So, like with technology, know that there have been many technologies before this. Unfortunately, we're not in a situation where we can change our circumstance, but we can certainly change our attitude to the tools and technology that we have, which are amazing. I mean, actually, let's talk about that secondly, Thom. Tell me about how you kind of feel people have in terms of a mindset around technology, particularly teachers. And if you've obviously talked with lots of teachers, you talk with lots of school owners as part of your profession. What is the mindset that people have, or what's, and I say mindset, but it might even be just a reaction, are people having to the need to use technology?
Well, I do a lot of teacher training and I do a lot of work with schools directly. And what's fascinating to me is the amount of teachers who have been told, right, we're teaching online from Monday because of the current crisis, for obvious reasons. And 50% of those people have gone, I can't teach online. What? I hate it, horrible. And the other 50% have gone, right, let me at it. Come on, let's have a go.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to watch that, because you sort of think, whatever we feel about it, if that's the way it's going to be, we can't turn up and go, I don't know how to do this, and I don't know how to, well, it's your job to know.
Yeah.
So you have to be competent, maybe not proficient at first, but you have to not only be competent, but you have to be wanting to become proficient, because if your student turns up and says, listen, I've got 10 words in English, I'm only using that, I don't need any more.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, no, because you've got to, and it's the same with teaching. And I always feel with teachers who say, I don't want to learn anything. I'm like, well, what have you got to teach then? Like, we live in a static world. No, we don't. It's always changing. And that renegotiation and that kind of breaking through stuff and paradoxes, parameters shifting, that's what's for dinner, isn't it?
I mean, to be fair, also, teachers, I think, can and should remain in their, it's an amazingly noble profession. One thing I would like to add to that, though, is that there's also a service being provided, right? That's what people are paying for, a service. And just as when you go to, into a nice retail store, to be quite frank, if you want to tell the real estate, the shopping assistant, hey, I just like black t-shirts and that's all I want to wear, you're the customer. You get to choose that. Yeah. And I think even if you're doing group classes, that doesn't mean that the teacher can just enforce their will, completely railroading what some of those students might be interested in. You can, but obviously at the expense of motivation. You can do anything.
It's always 50-50, isn't it? Like we can teach, but students have to learn. And I think some teachers, I say this with love in my heart because I've been one of those teachers, will sometimes feel like I know the syllabus, ergo I know everything, and I am the king in the room. I'm the queen in the room, and you think, well, actually, it's great that I know the syllabus, and it's great that I know the topic, but that doesn't mean that I know what you need it for, and I know how you'd learn it best, and I know, all I can do is present ideas, and all I can do is point you in directions, but you as a student need to go in those directions, eh? Yeah, I can hold your hand on the journey,
I think
bring you a sandwich.
I remember talking with one of our online schools, and he was telling me about how if you just, if you don't try and learn a language yourself as well, it can often, and particularly, you can start losing that empathy for the very people that you're trying to help. And often you can put in, I'm sure that there's a heuristic for it, but basically you're going, well, I learned this way, so therefore they should learn this way. And I really feel that as a student of language, I think that's really wrong. And I'm learning a language now, but I'm not learning it to pass a particular test. So why would I be interested in you teaching me as if I was passing one of those tests as the core idea? Now, again, as a group teacher, you can get away potentially.
I was waving to my wife, who just waved at the door. She may want something, she may not. She may have just been waving. I don't know. She's very affectionate. It's good.
Bringing people to the room. But I do think that if teachers can really bring that what the student wants to learn, it doesn't even have to be the whole syllabus, but if they're not really listening to the student, then is there any surprise that they're getting blank looks and people not interested? Is it any wonder if they're kind of talking in a sort of dull, monotonous voice, not allowing a bit of spontaneity to enter the room, that no one's really listening?
Totally true. I've had that, the amount of times that I've gone horribly wrong in a class where I've done something that's worked really well with the group before. So I'm desperate the group go in that direction, or the student follow me in this direction, because this is how it works in the past, and this is what I planned. And actually, they go totally off piste, and you're left kind of going, and the amount of times I've had to rein myself in and go, on you go, because it's your class. It's not about me getting you to this point that I want you to get to. It's kind of about you. Like, if you're interested in that and it's taking you on a linguistic journey, fair play to you. Because if I'm saying to you, look, you've got to do this thing because I want you to do this thing, but you've chosen to go on a different path. But if you're taking stuff from it and it's worthwhile, on you go.
But I think certainly in even in a group class, there has to be a little bit of give and take. In a one-to-one, it's a bit more obvious, like you can really follow where the student wants to go. In a group class, that becomes a bit more challenging, but equally, if what you wanted was like a whole bunch of faces listening inquisitively and curiously, you kind of have to talk to them in ways that they're interested in. Seems fairly obvious.
And you're never going to interest everybody at all times, because people learn in very different ways, and any group of more than sort of 2 people is going to be a group that learns in different ways and takes different things from the class, and that's all right, that's fair enough. It just means that you kind of owe it to them to change it up often enough. It's always the same, I think, with kind of our feeling sometimes in a language class is that what we have to say is important because we can say it best. I think, well, I can form grammatically complicated sentences. Doesn't mean they're worth listening to. Doesn't mean that what I say has value. And I speak a lot of languages because I'm good at languages. And people often say to me, "Oh, that's amazing! It must be great," as if I'm clever. You're like, no, I'm just good at languages. What's important is not what language I say stuff in. What's important is what I say. So the fact that I can speak another language doesn't mean that when I speak that language, I'm not talking bollocks, because, it's not, I can speak French and it's great. It's great. But I could be saying anything at all. And actually what's really important is what I'm saying in that language.
I would actually go one step further though, Thom, because part of me agrees with that, but part of me disagrees. And the bit that I disagree is how you say it. Like, you've got some people that can be talking about the most interesting content in the world and have no one listening. And you can have the opposite effect where people are talking absolute bollocks, but the way that they say it, the charisma, the energy, it feeds off that. And if I'm a student, more than anything, I want that energy. Like, the teacher's number one job, particularly in a group class, is to help me stay interested and curious and motivated. Like, no, it's still my responsibility to turn up and do the learning. But still, like, your job is to help this make it a really interesting, fun experience. Because otherwise, I'll just read a textbook. They're really boring too.
Right, it's a funny one, isn't it? Because it's Dorothy Zemak, actually, who's a great friend of mine and a really inspiring trainer for teachers, does a really great thing about which I always call her no fun talk, right?
Yeah.
Which is not a no fun talk, it's a great talk, but where she basically says that publishers are always saying, can you give us some fun activities? And she's like, well, I mean, I can do, but they're not there to have fun, are they? They're there to learn. Like, and if they've come to the class and they need to learn this, and I don't teach them that, but we have a lovely time, that's great. It's a lovely social interaction. But, as a teacher, if we haven't taught the thing, what I was saying before about them going in different directions, if they're going in different directions, but taking that lesson aim with them, that's fine. And if they're not taking the lesson aim with them, obviously you need to kind of steer that through, don't you? So, yeah, you're right. It's got to be engaging. It's got to be interesting.
I think so. Yeah, it doesn't have to be fun. That's it. I agree. I really agree. One thing I was thinking of with teachers was a lot of them are getting roadblocking themselves because they immediately say, I'm no good at teaching online. Yeah. And it strikes me as really odd because they're the same teachers that if I was in a physical classroom with them, I bet you they would be coming up with all sorts of creative, fun, interesting, ways to teach and to learn. Yeah, and it feels like a lot of teachers are like, I think because they're so scared about the technology, everyone's holding their hands in front of them like this, like they can't possibly move. And I notice it because obviously with LearnCUbe, we have an interactive whiteboard and that's for interaction. And so you need to unclasp your hands and actually pick up the pen, play around with that, and nothing's going to break, and that's fine. And you can actually pick up effectively a virtual book and put that on the whiteboard as well. And these are tools. Like, you've got hands, you've got tools. Yeah. Not that you have to use all of them, but there's some pretty fundamental tools. Just like if you're in a classroom with a whiteboard, you don't just leave the whiteboard there every single class because you don't think it adds any value. There's going to be classes where you don't need it, but there's definitely going to be classes when you want to use it because it's a tool and it makes things more interesting and it enriches and it's more visual and it can be more fun and it can enable a whole lot of activities that you would otherwise not get just from using your voice. But I mean,
I think you're totally right, and I totally agree that what I think I've taken away from the last couple of months is the 50-50, of people who are justifiably scared and saying, "Oh, this is all new to me, and I don't know what to do," and the other 50% who are kind of going, "This is great, it's so exciting, I can do this," and also they're often mixing, because I'm too concerned. Some people who 2 weeks later are saying, "Actually, this is fab, I'm loving it." or people who are quite interested in tech or quite enjoy tech, or even just like the idea from the start, who later on are going to get a bit jaded and say, I feel, and of course, that's the whole point of a new technology, of a new way of doing things. It takes time, and we've got to adapt to that, but we as teachers, I think, have to, we owe it to our students to work hard to get there. And teachers are, I'm not for a minute suggesting, and I know you're not, that teachers are not doing that. We're saying it's difficult, but we're also saying, the teachers that are out there that are really working hard and making this work and getting the knowledge and getting themselves to a level where they can use stuff proficiently, because competency, what I feel really interesting, at the moment, what's happening certainly in the UK, but also around the world, is schools that are saying to me, right, well, this online thing, we've got through that. Anyway, open the doors, in you come. That chapter's closed. And you're like, well, yeah, but there isn't a Pandora's box element to this, where lots and lots of teachers have gone, actually, this is really great. I don't have to commute, and I can teach in my pajamas, and I can smoke in class because I'm at home. Not that a lot of teachers smoke. I mean, that's more of a, but and a lot of students going, this is really great. I don't have to beat the traffic. I don't have to be across town by 7 o'clock. This is lovely. And a lot of schools going, hang on, we don't have to rent a massive building in the centre of Sydney. We can just do this online, and that's reshaping a lot of conversations. So that's fascinating.
I think regardless, it's really around that growth mindset, right? Like, so whatever your decision is as a business owner, and I definitely would not encourage everyone to suddenly like, oh, well, this happened, and so then I'm going to take my entire business online forever.
Yeah.
You've got lots of specialties. You've got all this wonderful branding and everything in person that you should try and keep and capture. Yeah. But one thing that is quite clear is that there have been lessons from this experience. And the ideal lesson is, I can improve. Like, whatever I've started with, I can get better at this. No one that I'm meeting that sort of inspires me is saying, I'll just go exactly back to how things were, because the world would exactly be the way it was in 3 months' time when everything opens. Like, it seems a very strange conclusion to get to. It might be comfortable, but it's very unhelpful. Whereas a growth mindset would be a lot more like, either, wow, that's a whole area that I really didn't know about. I need to up my game and learn more about that. And I'm going to apply it maybe in this small segment of my business, because if anything goes pear-shaped again, I've got resilience. And I think also we're getting pretty early on to this crisis, like this is over.
Well, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because teachers are grabbing the opportunities, really enjoying themselves, or frightened, or a bit of all of those things.
Yeah.
But whatever happens, this is here to stay in some form.
It is.
Or other. So the growth mindset is teachers who will always and have always been the people going, right, let me get better at this, let me push myself, let me do things that I'm not sure about. And that's online, offline, it doesn't matter. The growth mindset is that thing of thinking, I know how to do my job, and I want to get better at doing my job. I want to get better at doing my job, because otherwise I'm bored. I've always wanted to do new stuff and learn new things, because otherwise what have I got to teach? If I'm learning nothing, what can I teach anybody?
Yeah, I actually think one of the best ways to think about it as well is most people's expectations are pretty low right now. They're going to get high, but it means that as a teacher, if you do something that falls flat, so what?
And I've done that a lot.
But equally, the lesson is not, oh, well, that didn't work, so I'm a failure. That's not the lesson. And neither is the lesson, well, I'm never going to try anything because things will change. But what's most likely to come from this is you have lots of opportunity to experiment, to make mistakes, and no one's going to mind. As long as you come in with full of genuine willingness and motivation to teach as well as you possibly can, no one's going to mind. But you've got to come with some curiosity, with some motivation and some interest.
Yeah. And that, that's always true, isn't it? And you're right, people are kind of giving you a pass now, because everybody knows it's a weird situation, it's a new situation. But But, you know, if you never try anything new in the classroom, God, that's boring. You know, for the teacher, for the students, you know, I'd be bored out of my head, you know, and I've tried things and I've failed, believe me. You know? I've tried new things in the classroom and I failed, and I continue to fail, you know, and I think that's why I like teaching, you know, that's why I like training, is that I like doing stuff that I'm confident in and I know will work. And sometimes it doesn't, you know? And that's why it's interesting. That's why I do this job, you know?
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, I would hope that that's the inspiring story out of this. And if you're listening in, I just wish you absolutely every success, and give things a crack and make some mistakes, and no one's going to mind, but keep learning. Thanks again.
Pleasure and joy.
Thanks for joining us. Please subscribe to LearnCUBE's YouTube channel, where you'll find the latest on business, marketing, and teaching online, particularly focusing on language learning. Please subscribe now, and otherwise visit LearnCUBE at learncube.com. See you soon.